Britain has fallen, and their economy is in ruins. The cost of living is now so high that people are resorting to stealing food to survive. Energy bills are rising so quickly that churches and libraries are opening their doors to people who can't afford to heat their homes. Hundreds of thousands of industrial workers and university staff are going on strike. And to top it all off, they can now be facing blackouts on really cold winter nights, just when people need heating the most. But the worst part is that everything that's happening in Britain right now is a forewarning, a preview of what's to come in America. Except in America, it would be at a much larger scale. Because everything that Britain has been going through, America is going through the exact same thing right now as we speak. But to understand why, we need to take a closer look at how the British crisis began in the first place. And it all started with Boris Johnson stepping down. This video was inspired by Clear Value Tax's videos on the subject. I really like his videos and I'll link to his channel below if you want to subscribe. And really fast, if you want to earn some free cash, then you gotta check out freecash.com. Freecash.com lets you easily earn free cash by completing simple tasks like downloading apps, playing games, taking surveys, watching videos, and more. A lot of websites like this are very sketchy, but freecash.com has over 20,000 positive reviews on Trustpilot, and on average, free cash users cash out $50,000 every single day from completing tasks. Take this task for example, where you literally just have to download the Epic Times newspaper app on Android, or this one where you just have to sign up for SiriusXM's 3-month trial for $1 and you'll earn $9.34 in return. Once you complete a task, you'll get the reward credited to your account, and then you can withdraw the money using 20 different cash out options like PayPal. After completing a few offers, I was able to withdraw $5 to my PayPal, minus a 5% PayPal fee. So if you want to start earning some free cash right now, pause the video and sign up for free by clicking my referral link below. Pause the video and click the link below now. Thanks to Free Cash for sponsoring this video.
On July 7th, 2022, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson resigned. Over the 3 years he was Prime Minister, he was involved in a whole lot of scandals, like throwing parties in the middle of COVID lockdowns, or appointing a guy accused of sexual misconduct to Parliament. But the main reason Johnson was forced to resign was the absolute chaos of the British economy. By July 2022, inflation was at 10.1%, higher than it had been in the past 40 years. The pound was at an all-time low against the dollar, which meant imports were getting more expensive. GDP has been declining. Basically, his political career was in the drain, and everyone thought he wasn't the right guy to dig Britain out of the hole it was in. So after more than 59 senior government officials quit because they didn't have faith in his leadership anymore, Boris Johnson made the decision to call it quits and hand off the mess to someone else.
That Boris Johnson is likely to tender his resignation by the end of this day.
Breaking news overnight, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has resigned.
Now to breaking news, embattled UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is stepping down.
And that's where Liz Truss came in. The woman who said that she would come in and save the day. That she would single-handedly turn the economy around. That she would cut inflation in half, lower taxes, and return Britain to its glory days.
My tax cuts will decrease inflation.
But unfortunately for Liz, despite her best efforts, things were about to go from bad to much worse. Liz Truss based her entire campaign to become Prime Minister of Britain on two things: tax cuts, major tax cuts. In fact, tax cuts so big that the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies said that, quote, "it's half a century since we've seen tax cuts announced on this scale," end quote. And on top of the tax cuts, she would put a cap on energy bills. According to her, these two moves would lower inflation and turn the economy around for good. There was just one small problem. Thanks to the war in Ukraine, stuff like fuel and food aren't as easy to supply as usual. So Britain was already struggling with too little supply to meet demand. But what did Liz Truss want to do? Cut taxes and cap energy bills, which would lead to more money floating around for people to spend, which creates more demand around an already dwindling supply of stuff, which would lead to more inflation. So her plan to lower inflation was probably gonna do the exact opposite. But that wasn't the only problem. See, her two little anti-inflation strategies were going to cost the British government more than $150 billion. But when they announced these plans to the world, they conveniently forgot to include how they planned on paying for all of it, which only meant two things: borrow and print. The UK government was gonna have to borrow and print more than $150 billion in the middle of an economic crisis and skyrocketing inflation. The market was not a fan of this plan. But despite the critics, despite all the hate, Liz Truss stuck to her guns and pushed forward.
I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether.
Are you absolutely committed to abolishing the 45 pence tax rate for the wealthiest people in the country? Yes.
We're hearing that Liz Truss is preparing to scrap plans to remove the 45p top rate of income tax for the highest earners.
Less than 24 hours ago, the Prime Minister told the BBC she was absolutely committed to that policy. Less than 24 hours ago, you were tweeting that it was a great thing. What changed?
We just talked to people, we listened to people, I get it. And we felt that the 45p issue, the 45p rate, was drowning out a strong package of intervention on energy, a strong package of intervention on tax cuts for people generally.
Do you owe people an apology?
We're not going to proceed with the abolition of the rate. We've listened to people, and yeah, there is humility and contrition in that.
Sadly, the market didn't share her optimism. September 26th, 2022. Just 18 days after Liz Truss became Prime Minister, the pound nosedived against the dollar. Without a solid plan to pay for all her tax cuts, investors assumed the Bank of England, Britain's central bank, would either have to print or borrow all the billions it needed, which would definitely increase inflation and push the economy into an even deeper crisis. So instead of going down with Britain, investors got out while they still could and sold all their British investments. And surprise, surprise, with thousands of investors selling billions of pounds worth of investments, the value of the pound continued to plummet. By September 28th, the pound was weaker against the dollar than it had ever been before. We're talking about a currency devaluation of historic proportions. Suddenly, all those institutions that were still invested in Britain saw a massive percentage of their money wiped out. And the group that was hit the hardest? British pension funds. See, pension funds were loaded up on a ton of British government bonds. Think of bonds as simply loans to the British government, and they would use these bonds as collateral to take out loans from banks, and then use that new money they just borrowed to invest in more investments on a much bigger scale. So when the pound tanked, the banks suddenly wanted a whole lot more money as collateral for the loans they had given the pension funds. And since most pension funds' own money is tied up in government bonds, the funds had to start selling these bonds to free up cash. The only problem was dozens of massive pension funds were doing this at the exact same time. So British bonds started crashing as well. The problem with British bonds crashing is that more than half of all of Britain's savings are tied up in government bonds, which meant that Britain's savings were disappearing, and there was no end in sight. If someone didn't step in to stop the bond market from crashing, more than half of all of Britain's savings would be destroyed. People's retirement would be wiped out, and Britain would be looking down the barrel of a full-on financial doomsday scenario. And that's when the Bank of England came in. Just hours before the pension funds were about to collapse, Britain's central bank announced a plan to buy up more than $65 billion worth of government bonds. By creating this artificial demand, it hoped it could stop bond prices from falling further. And where would it get that $65 billion needed to buy all those government bonds? The money printer, obviously. The Bank of England was going to print an unlimited amount of money to buy an unlimited amount of bonds. The Bank of England literally announced that it would buy government bonds, quote, on whatever scale is necessary, end quote. And sure, that would stop bond prices from falling, but more money printing meant more inflation. Ah yes, what started out as an effort to reduce inflation ended with the money printer getting turned back on. By October 3rd, Liz Truss's finance minister finally came out and announced that they would be putting the brakes on their tax cut plan to try to reverse the meltdown, basically admitting that their original plan was a massive failure. But it was too little too late. On October 20th, Liz Truss resigned as Prime Minister of England. She had been in office less than 50 days, making her the shortest-serving Prime Minister in British history. She was eventually replaced by Boris Johnson's former Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak. But the damage was already done. Right now, inflation in Britain is even higher than before at 11.1%. The British economy is shrinking, and the Bank of England just announced Britain is facing its longest recession yet, with 2023 looking very grim. The UK government put themselves in an impossible position. They let the money printer loose during COVID by doing two things: lowering interest rates to near zero to encourage everyone to borrow money, and by literally just printing more money with a few clicks on a computer screen. This combo of lowering rates and printing money is called quantitative easing, which increases the money supply, which led to insane inflation. Once they saw that inflation was very real and very much here to stay, they were like, "Oh, bloody hell, we have to reduce inflation now." So they stopped quantitative easing and started quantitative tightening, where they would do the exact opposite. They started sucking money out of the system instead of printing it, and they raise interest rates to discourage people from borrowing money, all of which had the effect of reducing the amount of money in circulation and therefore reducing inflation. The problem with this is that everything's great when the money printer is on. The stock market magically skyrockets, real estate prices magically skyrocket, and everyone feels richer and starts overextending themselves. Businesses borrow more money than they can handle, businesses start hiring employees they don't need, people finance cars and homes they can't afford, which is all fine and dandy when everything's going up in price. But the second the money printer goes in reverse, things start to get real painful real fast. That was the situation Britain found themselves in. They had to reverse the money printer to reduce inflation, but reversing the money printer was painful, and it all culminated in the pension funds and bond market collapsing right before the eyes of the central bank. And it was in this moment that the Bank of England was faced with a choice. Let it all collapse, wipe out people's retirements and savings, and plunge the country into a depression right in the middle of winter that would lead to breadlines, social unrest, and the masses coming for your neck. Or you could simply turn the money printer back on just one last time. Letting it all burn down leads to a lot of pain now, suffering now, while the second option lets you kick the can down the road just a little bit longer, with the price being inflation spiraling into hyperinflation. If you were in the shoes of one of these central planners, which option would you choose? You would turn the money printer back on as fast as possible to avoid total mayhem. It was the definition of being between a rock and a hard place, and the Bank of England caved. And the next country to cave will be America. America was at the precipice of all this money printing during COVID, printing around 30% of all US dollars in existence in the span of 24 months. While the US Treasury borrowed trillions more on top of all that money printing to keep sending out stimulus checks. It was absolute insanity. But somehow, Daddy Powell assured us plebs that resulting inflation was just transitory. By March 2022, inflation reached 8.5%. So just like the UK, Daddy Powell had to finally accept the reality that inflation was not transitory. That printing 30% of US dollars in 2 years does in fact lead to inflation. So in March 2022, the Fed announced a total 180. It was going to put the money printer in reverse with some painful quantitative tightening. It started sucking money out of the system. The Fed started with raising interest rates by 0.25% almost every month, but even that wasn't enough. So in June, they switched gears and started increasing interest rates by 0.75% instead. The problem with this tightening is that it's painful. As soon as the Fed turned the money printer in reverse, everything started crashing. The stock market has been going down. Real estate is finally starting to crack, American savings are quickly running out while credit card debt soars. And now, we're in the same position Britain was in right before their pension funds and debt market was collapsing. And when something like that breaks in America, whether it's pension funds or bonds or whatever, when something like that breaks in America, America's money printer will be facing the same dilemma as Britain's money printer did: to print or not to print. If they don't print and let the economy correct itself, we may fall into a Great Depression unlike anything America has ever seen before. We're talking mass financial suffering, people being voted out of power, the poorest of the poor will go hungry, and ultimately there will be widespread civil unrest, with the masses wanting the heads of those in power on a stick. That's option 1. Option 2 is to turn the money printer back on, kick the can down the road one more time. The markets will start rallying again, but inflation will go from around 8% where it's at right now to something much, much higher. If you were in Daddy Powell's shoes, which route would you take? All we can say is you better start preparing now before it's too late. Subscribe to find out what happens next.
Were you surprised at these revelations? I personally am not. What's up guys, if you're new here, my name is Jake and this is one of the biggest channels on YouTube for documentaries on money, power, war, and crime, where we teach you how the world really works so you don't become a victim to it. So if you enjoyed this video, click that subscribe button below. You can follow me on Instagram at JakeChan, but that is gonna wrap it up. Thanks for being part of the Watch That End Club. Stay dangerous out there and I will see you guys in the next one.